When an alliance stays silent for too long, it is mistaken for weakness. But when Europe speaks up, the world is forced to listen. April 11, 2025, the European Union officially announces retaliatory tariffs on U.S. imports, with tariffs ranging from 10 to 25%. This is no longer an economic measure, it is a declaration of trade sovereignty between two global powers. After months of simmering tensions, the Trump administration's partial restoration of tariffs on Europe, in the name of protecting domestic production, has become the final catalyst. And this time, Europe has chosen neither silence nor negotiation. From a technical tariff dispute, tension has turned into a political statement. An affirmation from Europe: allies do not mean passivity. Free trade does not mean accepting any conditions. The EU doesn't tax haphazardly. It chooses each product line precisely, not just for commercial value, but for political value. Corn, wheat and soybeans, the staples of the Midwest, will face a 15% tariff when entering Europe. Light trucks, tractors and farm equipment, the specialties of the industrial manufacturing belt, will face the highest rate, 25%. And of course, Kentucky bourbon, Tennessee whiskey, California wine, all in the crosshairs. It's no coincidence that most of these products come from battleground states, places that could decide the outcome of the 2024 presidential election. From Midwestern grains to Michigan cars, from Kentucky spirits to California grapes, each tariff is a message to politicians in Washington. The EU doesn't fire cannons into the dark. It hits every flag, every industry, every voter that Washington is trying to keep. 12 hours of silence. Then a tweet. And it was clear, Washington was not backing down. If Europe thinks they can blackmail America with wine and tractors, they're in for a surprise. The U.S. administration called the EU tariffs disproportionate and politically motivated, and threatened to undermine the transatlantic economic alliance. We will not let our former allies take advantage of our position. For Trump, this was more than a trade dispute, it was an opportunity to reinforce his familiar message: no one should treat America like a pushover. While exporters fretted, some domestic industries responded, believing that the pressure would force Europe to back down. America reacted as a bloc divided between those who wanted to sell their products and those who wanted to keep them in the market. These were no longer warnings. They were real chess, with pieces called brandy, corn, tractors and national pride. European markets reacted quickly, but not in panic. The EU tariffs were seen as controlled and more symbolic than damaging. Meanwhile, U.S. wine exporters, especially in the high-end segment, face new pressure in the EU market, which accounts for 20% of the industry's global sales. There was no exodus, but there was a simmering worry, especially in the Midwest. Corn, soybeans, wheat, commodities that had just recovered from COVID, now face tariffs. Investors see the EU's response as enough to send a political message, but not enough to shake up global markets. However, if tensions continue to escalate, especially if the US retaliates with tariffs, all scenarios will have to be rethought. The post-globalization world is no longer divided into two, friend and foe, ally and adversary. It is being restructured into three poles: the US, China, and a Europe that no longer wants to sit at the wheel of Washington. For decades, Europe has been seen as an economic and military buffer between the two superpowers, the US and Russia, or the US and China. But the energy crisis, the supply chain crisis, and the war in Ukraine have pushed Europe into a different phase: strategic autonomy, in defense, technology, and trade. We used to think of the tariff war as a showdown between the US and China. But now, Washington is facing both Beijing and Brussels. And the biggest difference? The EU is not responding in a confrontational way, it is responding with laws, policies, and carefully calculated tariffs. When even traditional allies use tariffs as bargaining chips, global trade rules are being pushed into the past. Instead, it is a world where the rules of the game are rewritten every time the balance of power changes. Each event seems isolated, but it adds up to a bigger picture: the world no longer believes in unconditional globalization. We are witnessing a reshaping of the global trade order. It is no longer about free trade, it is about selective bargaining, with each pole holding its own definition of fair. If former allies start taxing each other, if each country rewrites the rules of the game, then the future of trade is no longer a question of profit, it is a question of trust.